Now, if you watched the coronation on Saturday of England's King Charles III, it would have been really hard to miss the massive diamonds in his crown and scepter. While the history and ritual of this event was fairly spectacular and thousands of people turned out to show their support, millions more watching on television, there is, of course, a lot of unhappiness in countries formerly ruled by Great Britain that those jewels are not much more than ill-gotten gains mined on the hardship and discrimination of South Africans who were deliberately excluded from the wealth of the land. So many people are asking, can we have our diamonds back, please? Let's discuss this now with Associate Professor of African Politics at Unisa, Everisto Benyera. Prof, thank you so much for joining us. It's such an interesting topic. Where do you stand on who is the rightful owner of the Colonial diamond, which of course has been cut up into many diamonds by this point?
Good evening to you and good evening to the viewers, and thank you very much for having me. There's a very simple answer to that question. All colonial transactions are illegitimate, therefore the diamond belongs to the people of South Africa. The diamond belongs to the people of Colonial, and the diamond is a representation of the sum of all colonial illegitimate transactions, from slave trade to colonialism and to coloniality. All blood diamonds are blood diamonds. At the end of the day, the diamond is ours.
Mm-hmm. The people who argue that South Africa has no claim will say it was found on a private mine owned, I think, by Thomas Cullinan. He then sold it for a price to the Transvaal government at the time, and the Transvaal government in 1905 gifted it to the British government. Does that make any difference in your view?
It does not. It is merely as an explanation of colonial transactions. Black people during that time were rounded up like animals and forced to dig for these diamonds in very unsafe conditions. Thousands upon thousands of Africans perished not only in Kimberley or the mines of Witwatersrand, but also in the mines at Kimberley here, some of which were owned by Sir Thomas Cullinan. So whether the ill-gotten diamond was eventually sold and resold, cut and recut, is immaterial. The bottom line is that all colonial transactions are illegitimate, and therefore the original position is that those resources belong to the people who were robbed, in this case the Black Africans, who were not only robbed of their mineral resources but of their very humanity. They were dehumanized in the process of the extraction not only of the diamond but even of their fellow Africans in the form of slaves. They were also dehumanized and thingified when other resources such as gold, timber, and I argue in one of my latest books, currently when data is being extracted from Africans, still Africans are not being treated as equal human beings. We claim not only our diamond, we claim our humanity.
We have seen in the last 10, 15 years, quite a few European museums in particular returning historical artifacts to parts of Africa. It's very often at the request of that specific African country. Has South Africa, to your knowledge, made any such request of the United Kingdom as yet?
Not that I know of. But what we expect as Africans is that the calls for the acknowledgement of colonial harms must not be left to individual countries, but at least must be addressed at regional bloc level, such as the SADC level, the East African Community, or the ECOWAS region. But the most efficacious organization in making this call is the African Union. Unfortunately, as you and I know, the African Union is the African Union. It is funded by the very people that we expect to acknowledge and to reparate. So this is left to individual citizens, civic society organizations, and some journalists and researchers that are doing a very good job of calling the British monarch to account for its colonial past. It is with a heavy heart that we watched Prince Charles putting our diamond on his crown. It's their king and it's our diamond. Let's distinguish the two.
So there's an interesting UN mandate from 2007, and that is the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and it called on states to restore cultural, intellectual, religious and spiritual property. Would a diamond fall under that category? I'm trying to think of sort of international law or legal means to easily get the diamonds back. Could one use that UN mandate? Is there a precedent for getting mined diamonds and jewels back to the country of origin?
There is no direct mandate for one simple reason, that when the processes of colonialism, Euro-North American modernity and imperialism ensued, Africa was incorporated into a regime of international law, albeit at the lowest echelons. We are consumers of international law. We do not contribute to the development of international law. So those that develop international laws develop them in their favor. You look at the contentious issue of the human remains that were taken by the Imperial German army from the then colony in Namibia. These are the Herero and Nama skulls. There is no legal instrument, there is no international norm, there is no international principle that directly addresses that issue, because those that lead and champion the development of international norms are implicit, therefore they will never self-implicate. Let me just give you a very clear example. There was a very huge slave trade, human trade. Just the naming of it, that thing is called the transatlantic slave trade instead of being called the British and American slave trade. The transatlantic, the Atlantic Ocean never enslaved anybody. It was the British and the Americans that did. So we don't have any direct law.
I hear you. So it in many ways is up to appeals being lodged on a case-by-case basis and that country saying we've got to do the right thing. We saw that Emmanuel Macron in 2019, he publicly committed to returning African artifacts. We've also seen King Charles express regret and then also basically saying that he acknowledges that it was wrong, suggesting perhaps, and this is perhaps my final question to you, do you think that King Charles III will be receptive perhaps to this plea, particularly if it does come from the South African government? How much hope do you have?
Very, very little to no hope at all. I am not a fan of the British monarchy. I am not... just look at the way that they treated one of their own. He was sitting, I think, on the third or fourth row, simply because, among other reasons, there was a fallout in the royal family. If they can treat one another like that, what about us? They are former slaves. They are former subjects. The refusal of the current British monarchy just to retire our diamond and start the conversation, their refusal to directly acknowledge their role in slave trade, in colonialism, and all their historical heinous past is an indication that, one, they are afraid of the consequences that may arise. Two, maybe they still view us as their subjects, but this is not the case. And the more you ignore a case like this, the more it grows the proverbial legs. This case is just beginning. All British museums almost resemble crime scenes because the artifacts that are there are all stolen goods.
Strong words, and thank you so much for speaking to us this evening. It's a fascinating and important subject to ventilate and to consider. That is Associate Professor of African Politics at Unisa, that's at the University of South Africa, Everisto Benyera. Thanks so much for your time.